This is a massive get. The most exciting get I've ever had on the show. I've had John Legere from T-Mobile. I've had Sergio Garcia. But this is big.
Bow Wow yesterday.
Bow Wow yesterday. Tim, everyone knows Tim Ferris. 4-Hour Work Week fame. Tim, how do we know each other?
We know each other from college. And I remember very distinctly the video editing class. We had a very sort of wacky mad scientist teacher.
Yes.
And we struggled to use both linear, meaning cut, and non-linear video editing equipment to put together these various short film projects that we were all working on at the time.
Okay, now when I tell people you and I went to college together, people think like we went to the University of Michigan with 60,000 people and I didn't know you. I was in, how many people were in the class that you and I were in together?
I'd say 6.
6 to 8. Okay,
Yeah.
So I really know Tim Ferris, even though people don't think. Now, do you remember the day that you were practicing drop kicks and we had a fight about that? Do you remember?
Do not remember. It doesn't surprise me.
Okay.
I'm not surprised.
We go outside during the break. This was like it was a long, what was it, like a 3 or 4 hour seminar?
It was a long seminar.
It was a long seminar. You get to go outside for a break. And Tim was practicing drop kicks in the courtyard.
Okay.
And he was doing drop kicks that were coming within 2 inches of my face.
I think I've heard this story before.
And I said to him, Tim, please stop doing drop kicks 2 inches from my face. And Tim's response was, oh no, I'm a master. You were a...
I wouldn't have said master, but I was in training at the time.
Yeah, she's here.
Because later, in '99, I ended up competing in the nationals for kickboxing.
Okay.
So,
He's like, no, I'm a really good kickboxer.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna hit you in the face. And I was like, well, I still don't like you practicing kicks within 2 feet
in
of my...
retrospect, it's kind of a bastard move for me to be throwing kicks in front of your face. I mean,
Right.
in hindsight.
And then you were a
That could be
competitive
scary,
ballroom
though.
dancer at this point as well, too.
I was just
Wow.
getting into, so I was co-founder, this is something people don't really know either, co-founder of the first hip-hop dance troupe at Princeton.
All right.
And so that was my Simpo, which is still going strong. And then later got into the ballroom dancing and went to the world championships for tango and all that.
So how do you have time for all this? Only working
Because he
4
only
hours
works
a
4
week,
hours
I
a
guess,
week.
right? 4 hours a week?
Exactly. And I suppose that's a short answer.
Okay, so a new show coming out May 30th. It's premiering. It's called Fearless with Tim Ferris. It's going to be on AT&T's Uverse, the Audience Network, specifically. So what can people expect from the show? I'm guessing no drop kicks or no hip hop dancing, but maybe I'm wrong.
No drop kicks. There is a little bit of fight sport. We have some fighters on, very interesting fighters. But the show is something I'm really excited about because it's fear less in parentheses. So the goal is to learn to fear less. So meeting with people like David Blaine, the illusionist and endurance artist, or Bill Burr, comedian. There's a whole spectrum of guests to talk about their doubts, their fears, their moments of darkness, and how they overcame them. So we have this incredible set build out, audience interaction. We show childhood videos, and I want to get past the highlights and talk about how they overcame some of the hard points. So that is the premise, the basic premise of the show.
Okay, and you talked about several of the key people you'll be talking to, but I would imagine being fearless, probably for them, was very integral and part of their success, right? I mean, people have said on the show before that if you hold on to a lot of fear, it's really hard to move forward.
It is. Well, there were a few patterns that came out that were surprising, to me at least. Almost all of them, for instance, have read Stoic philosophy at some point, which I have been obsessed with since right after college, actually. Many of them do exercises to, in some ways, take the power away from nebulous fears. So they're really good at defining their fears and succeeding on their own terms, which implies you have terms, right? So they're also very good at defining for themselves what success means.
So let's talk about stoicism.
Let's do
Okay,
it.
Coach Kevin, my trainer,
Yeah.
and I train at a level comparable to you.
Yeah.
He's very into Stoic philosophy. He got me this book called The Daily Stoic. Are you familiar with this book?
Two of my friends wrote it. Yeah.
Okay. Walk everybody through the Stoic mindset.
Yeah. So the Stoic mindset, this goes back quite a ways to about 300 BC in Athens. Stoa means porch. So a lot of the initial lectures were taught by Zeno, and that then turned into Stoicism. I'll try to keep this short. But Stoicism can really be thought of as an operating system for separating the things you can control from the things you cannot control, and then focusing on the things you can control. It's also very, very good for practicing what you fear. So whether you talk to, say, Seneca from 2,000 years ago, or you talk to Michael Gervais, who's one of the most successful sports psychologists in the world, works with Super Bowl champions, they will dose you with what you fear. And that is a means of exposure therapy. And net, what that means is the things that terrified you at one point, say months later, no longer have any negative impact on you. So Stoicism to me is not just about understanding the theories, it's about putting different types of theories into practice.
Right, so but how do you categorize or how do you separate the two? I mean, how do you know if there is something that you absolutely cannot control, you're never going to be able to control it?
Yeah.
How do you make that differentiation?
Depends on who you read or who you talk to. So some would say that anything that can be taken away from you is outside of your control. So in other words, so Epictetus, who was a handicapped slave who later became one of the most famous Stoic teachers and advisor to the emperor, would have said that, in effect, everything that happens is outside of your control. All that you can control is your response. And that applies to sports, it applies to business, it applies to people launching ESPN. So we have Bill Rasmussen, founder of ESPN, on the show as well. If you're encased in ice for days at a time, like David Blaine, I mean, all of it comes down to how you choose your response. And fortunately, that's something you can train. So Mike Tyson used to cry before his fights. Dean Martin used to vomit before his performances. So you can train yourself in really specific ways to learn to fear less.
Tim, if you think about your journey, starting with the 4-hour work week and to the stuff you're focused on now, and I've read most of your stuff, I haven't read the new book yet, but is it a journey from like efficiency now to more about mindset and rigor? Do you feel like the stuff you're focused on has evolved and gotten kind of more internally focused as opposed, because 4-hour work week was about tactics, like check your email like this, this is how you can travel, you know?
No, definitely. I think it's that over time I've realized achievement's really important. So the effectiveness, the tactics, the efficiency is really critical, but it's only one piece of the puzzle, because you can be flying ahead at 100 miles an hour, but if you are never, for instance, enjoying or appreciating what you have, so the appreciation component, which is I would say 50% of it, at some point you realize that you need both. In other words, if you can't train yourself to tackle fears, but also want what you have, then nothing you get will ever make you happy.
Well, this is also a little bit like, I've been doing Headspace, right? And it's a little bit like, to your point about being in the moment, it's about sitting with the fear, sitting with the anxiety, acknowledging the emotion, as opposed to futurizing.
Yeah, and not getting wrapped up in it, right? So Headspace, I've used Headspace as well, and most of life, most people spend in the washing machine. With something like Headspace or Stoicism or many different practices, you can step outside and look into the washing machine. So you can observe, you're like, oh, I'm about to get really angry.
Right.
And then you can observe.
Oh, I'm experiencing anxiety. Oh, I'm nervous about this.
And you can become the observer. So if you look at some of the most successful Navy SEAL commanders, if you look at some of the most successful entertainers, people in government, they have this ability to detach and observe themselves. And almost all the guests, I would say all of the guests, for instance, that I've interviewed, whether on the podcast or in Fearless, have that quality, the ability to observe themselves.
Speaking to the Fearless show, why is AT&T, do you think, the right platform to show this?
The right platform because I had some great partners. I mean, the team at Wild West, so Vince Vaughn, Peter Billingsley, and then Chris Long at AT&T, let me be myself. I mean, he wanted me to do what I am ostensibly good at and to really just be myself. So I had a lot of input into the show. I had a lot of input into how we would work with the guests. I was able to, I'm from Long Island. I'm not super refined in a lot of ways.
Let's also talk about platform. And we announced this week, AT&T is now an investor in Cheddar. As we were coming on before, you were talking about DirecTV Now and the OTT platform. Why was it important for you to be there, and how do you think about these new platforms for video consumption like DirecTV Now?
It's critical for many different reasons. I mean, a large portion of my audience would be considered cord cutters. So they need digital access, and they need simple access on multiple devices. So that was a non-negotiable for me. I needed and wanted both, say, the terrestrial linear, but absolutely the OTT and digital delivery. It was a non-starter if that didn't exist for me. So that was That was, I would say.
When shopping around the show, did you find that other platforms wanted to have more control and wanted to tell you, I guess, what their vision was and tell you what they wanted versus AT&T, where it sounds like you were very much part of the entire vision?
No, exactly. So the big difference, it's super simple. Usually people would come to me and say, hey, we have this show. It's like the entrepreneurial makeover Real Housewives of fill in the blank, and we want you to be this talking head, and you're going to do exactly A, B, C, D, and E. And in contrast to that, Wild West and AT&T came to me and they said, we've seen your stuff, we liked your TED Talk, we really like this part of your book, what do you want to do? It's just a fundamentally different
Tim,
approach.
last question for you.
Yeah.
You're a very eccentric person.
I am.
Your views are far outside the mainstream on everything, on a lot of things. What has the journey been like for you? Have you at times thought to yourself that you need to be more conventional? Were there moments where you doubted your eccentricity and uniqueness in things?
Oh, I would say I have a quarter-life, midlife crisis every 3 to 6 months related to some type of doubt. Yeah, absolutely. I think that I've tried to become, over time, better at asking myself questions, and that leads to, when you question your path, I think a certain degree of self-doubt. So I've absolutely had battles.
And we went to a college that was very conventional and very boxed.
Yeah.
And you were a guy that was considered very out there at college, and you could have caved into conformity. And why do you think that didn't happen in college? I think about that about you all the time.
Yeah.
Why did Princeton not make you into a box?
Well, one thing you might not know, which I haven't really talked about all that much publicly, will be coming out in a TED Talk that's coming out in maybe a few weeks' time. But so I came really close to the edge of the precipice at Princeton. I mean, I ended up taking a year off at the very end, and it was a very, very dark time for me. And I think it was partially because I felt like I was a sort of a square piece trying to fit myself into a round hole, or vice versa. Choose your metaphor. I just didn't fit.
Right.
And it was a very punishing experience for me. I mean, I tried to follow a lot of the tracks. I applied to the management consulting and the iBanking, and it felt so incongruous with me.
I found it, I found it very similar too, to be honest. I went back there and I gave a talk and a few weeks ago, and it's like I was denied thesis funding. Except for a few professors, everybody thought that my interest in the internet was like kind of stupid, right? Like everybody wanted me to go work at Goldman Sachs.
Yeah,
so,
right.
I mean, you and I have both ended up in kind of unique places and things, right? And it's sort of like, it was a hard journey, I think.
No, it was, and I would just say, what I've become more and more convinced of, whether it's living in Silicon Valley, I've been there for 17 years, you and I have both had different trajectories in tech, but I've definitely been very involved on the investing and advising side of tech. You have to be different. And so you should be unapologetically your weird self, as Chris Sacco would say, who's a friend. And I saw him go from like barely being able to get a place in Truckee to now being on the cover of Forbes Midas issue. And that is one of his golden rules.
No, look, I remember being with Sacco in a taxi, I think, at the Shorty Awards, like, this had to have been like 7 years ago, like in Brooklyn, at some creative art space. The dude had no money, right? Like the first fund was like, he was just writing checks into all these like Twitter apps that were like going nowhere. It is, and with the cowboy shirts, I mean.
Oh yeah. Bought in Reno, initially. And it's been a wild ride. And what I've realized, I think, all right, so what have I learned in my ride is that a lot of people are good at setting goals. They're really good at determining their direction. And then they try to get there with the emergency brake on. And the emergency brake is some type of fear, and 9 times out of 10, it's unfounded or unexamined. Like, there are real fears that are well-founded. Most are not.
Gotta let it go sometimes.
Tim, it has been so great to catch up.
Yeah, you too.
Congratulations on everything.
Yes.
I got to read Titans. I haven't read it yet. And we look forward to the show on DirecTV now. We'll certainly be watching it. Tim Ferris, host of Fearless. Fearless with Tim Ferris. It's going to be on the Audience Network on DirecTV now. It comes out
on the May 30th, 8 p.m., and you can watch the trailer and everything else, as well as see all the guests at tim.blog/fearless, which has all of this info there.
All right, well, we'll put that in the notes. We'll put the clip up. Tim, thanks for joining us.